start the recording right now. And we seem to be going. And I'd like to introduce Linda Tadic, who is doing a reprise of a great talk she gave for us, and a great instructional conversation around the preservation of video assets. It's really one of the most feature-rich presentations we've ever had at the DAM Meetup back in 2010, almost 4 years ago at this point. Actually, a little over 4 years at this point. Linda has a very wide curriculum vitae of experience within the video world. She's currently the executive editor for the Audiovisual Archive Network in Los Angeles. She does consulting for various companies around metadata, doing metadata audits, functional specifications for companies that are moving towards a digital asset management system. And in addition to that, she's also the adjunct professor for UCLA's Moving Image Archive Studies graduate degree program. And she's also, in the past, worked at HBO's Digital Library Manager, Director of Operations for ArtStore. She was a former president of the Association of Moving Image Archivists, and is co-author of Descriptive Metadata for Television, an end-to-end introduction published by Focal Press. So what I'll do is I will turn this over to Linda. I'll be running the slides, so Linda can just let me know when it's time to move to a new slide. And take it away.
To be with you virtually in New York. I lived in New York for 11 years before moving back to LA in 2011. So it's nice to virtually be with you guys. So in this very quick bit of time, I just want to try to give a brief primer on the issues or the concerns around preserved video assets. So we go to the next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Okay, so like I said, it's going to be brief. Now, when you talk about video assets, you have to talk about preserving them. This is preservation, of course, and you have to talk about metadata. And so there really isn't time to go into this in detail. Like people take courses on it. You might mention I teach at UCLA, I taught at NYU when I was in New York, and people study this stuff for years. And so we only have like 30 minutes or so. So it's going to be brief, but I want to give you some resources at least, so you can go ahead and do future research. So today tonight we're going to go through some physical video formats, so not really tackling into the digital realm. And their preservation concerns. Talk a little bit about digital preservation, extremely brief, just an introduction to metadata standards for video. So let's keep on going right. Go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so physical video. Okay, so videotape was invented in 1956, and those were really big 2-inch quad videotapes. You've seen them on the shelves, perhaps. But since then, over 60 physical formats have been introduced. I mean, we're talking about the digital formats. There's just a lot of different formats, so we're going to cover just a few of them tonight. It was never intended as a preservation medium. It was just meant to record stuff so that it could be shared and distributed around the country and around the world. In fact, Bing Crosby was the main investor to invent video. He gave seed money to Ampex to start creating video because he wanted to record his shows and make them perfect. So anyway, the rough life expectancy, or the LE, for these physical video formats, for the larger formats, the 2-inch, the 1-inch, they can go 35 to 50 years. The more professional grade formats that long. But when you get to even more recent formats, so that's only 5 to 10 years. That's for the consumer tapes, or those thin cassettes, the DVC clones, and mini DVDs, and metal evaporated, or ME tapes. We'll get into the whole ME issue in a little bit. So Mike, next slide. So this slide, and Mike will probably give you all a copy of this that's in case you can't see it. So a year ago, I did a webinar on video format identification and preservation, and the next slide will be a link to that because you can access the materials, which are pretty extensive. So in doing that webinar, I did a research on, so what video formats, what stock, and what decks are in current production, because of course if you have a video tape, you need to have a deck to run it, right? And so it's really important to know, even if a stock is being still supported, are there any decks to play it? So this spreadsheet here, the table tells you what formats are in.
Oh, crap.
Are we back?
Yep, we're back. Sorry.
Okay. So on the left, you'll see what stocks are there, and even when I went to NAB 2 years ago, the only videotape stock that you saw on the floor was HDCam in the Sony booth. And when I went this year, there was no videotape to be seen anywhere at all. Everything's going digital. So it's definitely decreasing. Even if you go down to DigiBeta, well, DigiBeta stock is being created, but the deck, the standalone DigiBeta decks are not being manufactured anymore. So anyway, you can take your time and look at this, and it's a little bit scary. So we won't spend time on it right now, but really obsolescence is the main problem with physical video formats. They just come and they go, and there's no more support. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the link to the webinar I mentioned that I did a year ago. It's free, so you can actually go to it, to that link. Go down to webinar number 3. It was a series of audiovisual format identification. You can download the PDF of the deck I created, but download the color one. It's pretty big. It's 11 megs. And I made it color because so many of the formats are identified by the color of the cassette case, for example. So I recommend that you do that. It also shows the decks that are associated with the case. There's also been links to bibliographies for future reading, vendor lists. If you need to find a vendor, you can transfer these weird formats you might have in your collections as well. So go ahead and use those, that resource freely. Next slide. All right, so just quickly over some of the formats. So OpenReel formats. So these are the formats you might find in your collection. These are older ones, so I don't know where you all work. But so as you can see, the earliest format, the 2-inch quad, it pretty much expired in the early 80s. I have gone into some collections, and you can find them maybe up to 1985, 86, but it really started dying out in the early 80s. 1-inch tape then replaced it, even more like broadcasting standard formats. And then the 1/2-inch portapass, which some of you might find these weird 1/2-inch tape, you think it's audio tape, but if it says Sony on the outside and it's a black box, so that's video. And that was only released from 1965 to roughly 1973. You'll see that in a lot of documentation of music clubs. Actually, in the late 60s, documentation of events, that kind of thing. Artists use a lot of, many artists use this one. So let's keep on going. Then you can see we have the expiration date. Now we go into the cassette formats. These are the analog cassette formats. Look at them. They're all dead. None of them, except VHS, the poor and lowly VHS, that is still in production. But none of those cassette formats are in production. The NP and the MP&ME, at the end, we're going to talk about that a bit, because that's very important to know if your videotape is nanoparticle or evaporated. Let's go to the next slide. And then the digital physical video formats are all of these here, and they only want, so you'll see that there are several of them that are still in use. HDCam is really the only professional tape that's being used. And then those smaller cassettes are used sometimes for shooting out in the field, for film shooting. UVC Pro in particular, UV panel, is still being used, even though there is definitely a trend towards digital. And again, that MP and MP is very important to keep in mind for the next part of our discussion. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so videotape properties, and this slide, the image is taken from a still very handy guide book to magnetic tape storage and handling. You can get this freely available on the internet. It's in that bibliography list you can get from the other website. But anyway, so here's this diagram of what makes a videotape. And so just very briefly, the parts that will interest us the most are the binder and the magnetic particle and the lubricant. So the back coated on the bottom, that's basically the tape that holds everything else on, and it helps run it through the decks, the tape through the decks. The substrate then is what's on top of the back coat, and that is what then the binder would be placed on top of. Now the magnetic particles, those are what hold the information. That's the video information in those. Those are, if you look at it's commonly the metaphor is used for, like, that Jello salad that has marshmallows and grapes and pineapples and stuff in it, and it's kind of jiggly. So think about the binder as being the Jello, and the magnetic particles are all those bits that are in the Jello. And so, it's holding it. The binder is holding those magnetic particles, which hold the information. And the lubricant, of course, is inside the binder, and so that helps the tape to go smoothly through the machines to keep it running. So now we're going to talk about the things that can go wrong with these primary parts or elements of videotape or magnetic media. So inherent problems just with the magnetic media itself. Okay, the binder. So again, I mentioned the binder holds the magnetic particles, and that is probably the weakest link. Because what happens is that hydrolysis, or what some of you might know as sticking shed, it's like when you put a tape through it and it starts squealing. That's because the binder is starting to fall apart. And that usually happens when there's high humidity and the binder just starts shedding. And so if it starts shedding, then of course you're losing the magnetic particles which hold the information. Mold is another issue that can happen to the binder, in that the PDF of that webinar has some really juicy images of mold on videotape, and I'm working with a collection now that has quite a bit of mold on some of the video and audio tape, because it really fits both magnetic media types. Both of them are caused by high humidity. But it doesn't have to be, we're not talking about the South Pacific. It can be anything above like 45% relative humidity, and on up, you can get mold. Lubrication, which is again part of the whole thing that the media that helps it go through the desk, that decreases over time. It just dries out. So it decreases because you play it, you lose some lubrication, and then in dry environments, you start losing that lubrication as well. It just dries out. So that decreases. If you don't have the lubrication, it's going to jam up and squeal in the deck, and you can damage your tape. Now let's go to the next slide. So then that was just the binder and the lubricant. Now we're talking about the metal particles. So again, this is what holds the information. And there are a couple of different kinds of metal particles. And again, we'll go to that PDF where it goes into more detail. So iron oxide is the most stable. And that's what you would find in those 2-inch and the 1-inch tapes. That lasts the longest. That's why you will find in collections, if you have, even though your 2-inch and your 1-inch tapes might be the older media you have in your archive, those, if they've been stored well, you can do those last. You will focus on the ones on the tapes where that could be more recent, that are using metal particle. Tape, for example, is better signal quality, doesn't last as long, and so you'll see that in most of the digital cassettes that are out there. The metal evaporated, the ME, the problem there is that it's no binder. So those metal particles are put directly onto the substrate. So they can come off pretty darn easily. So archivists say that there's a 5-play rule, that you don't play that tape more than any tape that more than 5 times. You should get it off that tape. They're great. They're fabulous for going out and shooting in the field. But the moment you come back to wherever you're working, you put it in the deck and you transfer it off to something else. Because those tapes really don't last long, and it's very easy for them to start falling apart. So 5-play rule is when you don't put the tapes in freeze frame, because that can start stretching the tape as well. And you'll find that, unfortunately, in the 8mm video, but also in DV cam and mini DV. So there's a lot of ME, and you can tell if something is ME or MP by just they stamp it onto the cassette itself. So again, look at that PDF of the webinar where it shows you where to look on the tape, or you can just look at it and go to your shelf and pull out a DV cam or mini DV tape, and we'll say ME on it most likely, or MP for some of them. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now the substrate, that's the backing of it. There can also be deformation there, and so if it starts getting crinkly, if it's not working right, then if there's any kind of stresses, then there can be mistracking, because there is a control track that goes along the edge of the tape. It's kind of the equivalent of, think about film sprockets, that run the film through a projector and through a camera. But that control track is controlling the tape to run through the deck. So if you damage it, it's on the edge of the tape. So if the substrate, that backing, is deformed in any way, or stressed or wrinkled, then it's going to cause dispersion in your images and also mistracking on the tape. And then the main things I was mentioning at the very beginning is format obsolescence, where the tapes formats just become obsolete, and then you can't find the decks to even play them. So let's go to the next slide. Now, what can you do to damage your tapes? Well, you can have that. What we talked about so far is just what inherently can happen and will likely happen to the tapes. One or two or more of those bad things that I talked about will happen to your videotape and legacy assets. But what you can do, Karina, is you can have a poor tape pack, which means if you look at the tape and you'll see some of the strands might be popping up, that means it's not a good flat pack, and with those pop-ups there, they can easily become bent, they can be damaged, and then that will destroy the control track, so then when the tape won't play. If you don't rewind the tape to the end of the tail, you leave it open so the tape is exposed in that little opening part, then that is an opening, literally, for hydrolysis to happen, because the heat in the air, the moisture in the air go in and enter the tape in that spot, and will just start stretching out, and impacting the rest of the tape. If you leave the tape in pause or freeze frame, then it's going to stretch the tape. You can leave it in there for a long time. And of course, if you have a poor storage environment, if it's not cold and dry, if it's not optimal, then that will help deterioration to happen, the mold, the bad humidity, or even if it's too dry, it can make the tape brittle. So let's go to the next slide. So preservation actions, what can you do? Well, the storage environment is the easiest thing you can do. The macro environment, which means what is like the temperature, humidity, and shelving. So you want to store between 50 and 68. That's a pretty big range. And 68 would like a typical office environment. Ideally, of course, you want to be on the lower end, but you definitely don't want to be over 68. And relative humidity should be 30 to 45. Now, do not store, because everything's great out, just put it in my freezer, but you don't want to do that because anything under 46, and the manufacturers actually state this in their specifications, the binder will start breaking down. If it's over 46 degrees, 46 degrees Fahrenheit, if it's over 74 degrees Fahrenheit, then you increase that tape tightness, and that will then cause dropouts, and over 65% relative humidity, mold can occur. And I've seen collections that are stored in just like public storage units, and like the one I'm looking at now, and there's mold, there's brittleness, and this is Los Angeles. It's not like we're in the South Pacific. It's just that it's really, if you don't have a steady, good, cold, and dry, not too dry environment, bad things will happen to your tapes. Shelving, don't use wood shelving, use metal shelving, because the wood usually it's acidic itself, and it off gases, and that can help to damage any of your media refilling. You never want to use wood shelving for any media. Next slide. The micro environment, so this would be cans, boxes. So don't store in those really soft plastic stock cases, stock boxes. Don't store like VHS tapes or other tapes in cardboard sleeve boxes. Take them out and put them into good, fresh polypropylene containers. If you can, it says cans in containers. If not, then at least have it in good, clean, new plastic cases. If there's any paper inside those cases, you take them out because the paper is acidic and it will accelerate then hydrolysis. It attracts moisture and which will impact the tapes. Keep your tapes standing upright just like books. You can be either up like a book or even with a long side being against the shelf, stored more horizontally. Just don't have them flat, don't have them stacked, which is what most people do in their offices. They just stack them on their desk or on the shelf, and they just stack them up, so you have this really tall stack. Nope, they want to be storing it like books, because otherwise if you have them flat, then the tape gravity, as a natural gravity, will start the tape to sag, and then you'll start losing, it can damage the tape. And again, you also want to be sure that the tape is wound heads to tails, or tails with a firm tape pack. Okay, let's go on. Next slide. Now, what some folks will do is if you have a valuable tape, they say, oh, let's just bake it. But the problem is if they think, oh, we can bake anything, but really you can only bake iron oxide metal particle-based tape. If you put in any MPME or 002 tapes, they're going to damage them. So you have to be very careful. You have to know what is that, what are the metal particles, Meetup. But I highly recommend don't do this at home. Use a professional. They'll know what to do so they don't damage the tape. It's worth the money to have somebody else do it for you. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so you have to digitize. This stuff isn't going to live much longer. I mean, basically, as I mentioned, I taught it in my new NUM at UCLA, and my students, by the time they're mid-career, there won't be any more videotape to reformat. It's going to be gone. So there's a great crisis of urgency in the archival community, and pretty much anybody who has magnetic media, whether it's video or audio tape, because audio tape is also magnetic media, you have to digitize it because it's dying all around us. It's just going to be gone. And you can't do everything, so you have to really think about, okay, what should I attack first? So I'm not going to talk about content, because only you and your organizations know what content is valuable. But if you're just thinking about it on a format basis, then you're going to have to think about the age of the tape and what the format is, and whether it's MP or ME. So triage, I mean, if you ask me, if you have these three formats I have listed in your collection from these date ranges, I would tell you that you would do that. It's the first 10 years, at least, that it was just bad stuff. That it wasn't really stable yet. And so a lot of the stuff in that time period was really washed out. It's just losing its color and it's being everything. So focus on those first. Especially has only like a 35-year life expectancy. Then go for those little guys that are on their knees. I would do those next. Even though they're the youngest, I would do those next. After that, go to the Beta Chem and Beta SP created before 1995. And you know what? I would put those two files at the end of the list, unless they're really old and particularly valuable, that would help you for something. But those are pretty stable. Okay, let's go on. So you have to reformat, which means you're, of course, not going to reformat to another video format, because why continue killing, his content, putting it onto more obsolete formats? So you're going to have to digitize it. So we're going to move now to digital stuff and going into digital preservation. So you have to decide on what is your target file. And usually in the archival community, we talk about 4 file states that are possible. So the first file state is original. That's your camera original. So in the case of a video, digital video format, that's going to be, say, for example, your DV tapes, when you want to always transfer it off into the native file format as on the tape itself. So that's your camera original. Your preservation format is your target format, where you have, say, like a Beta SP tape or a 3/4 traffic or whatever, and you want to transfer that. So you're going to choose your target preservation format, which will be the highest resolution that you can manage. And normally folks store that file offline if it's a really, really big file. The mezzanine file is the equivalent of a copy master. And so you usually want to have access to that. The copy master is compressed down from the preservation master, but you can use that to make your access copies from. Which is the 4th kind of file state, of which normally folks will have many, many, many different kinds, depending on the purpose of the access file. If you can stream it or print a DVD or a Blu-ray or whatever. So let's go to the next slide. So as you're thinking about it, what are we going to transfer these tapes to? So it's not just that you can just think abstractly, sure, this sounds good, let's transfer to this. You have to also consider your external factors. What can your institution support? So the first thing you want to think about is estimate what is if you transfer at the format X, format Y, what would be the total digital storage for that? And can you support that digital storage? And if not, if you can't support it internally, then you have to always start thinking about, okay, where can you store all of your files? Do you have the staff support to manage and preserve the files? Because if you want to store them in-house, then you're going to have to store them on something, which means you're going to migrate it forward, move the media forward in the future for preservation. Say, for example, you had your stuff on LTO tapes, LTO 5, well, when LTO 7 comes along, you're probably going to want to migrate them to LTO 7, because LTO tapes are only 2 generations backwards readable, compatible. So you want to always keep the generations ahead. So you have the staff to actually do that. If you have really big files, it's going to take you a lot longer than if you have smaller file. What is your editing environment? So whatever target file format, you will make sure that your folks there who are doing the editing can actually use the files that you're creating. And also, what's the playback or the rendering capability of the file? So again, that goes into if it's a proprietary file format, do you know that you'll be able to play it in the future if suddenly the manufacturer or the owner, the patent holder of that format decides to no longer support it? Let's go to the next slide. So those are all external meaning just outside of the file format itself. So then other selection considerations then, so it depends on the source format. Now there are some folks who say just do everything at this one format, doesn't matter as a target format, doesn't matter what the original source was. But I disagree with that because, for example, there's no need to transfer a VHS tape at 10-bit uncompressed video when the quality of the video, the VHS tape, was never intended to really be shown or used in a high-quality environment. Files on DV tape should be transferred in a native format, whatever it is. So you're not going to go from a mini DV tape to uncompressed. You know, it's just like there isn't that kind of, that's overkill. You don't need to do that. You shouldn't do that. Don't use a target format with higher resolution than the original. Again, it goes back to like a VHS tape to 10-bit uncompressed. You want to do that when it can even support 10-bit color. The VHS tape wouldn't support 10-bit color anyway. Format sustainability, so don't use proprietary format. I know a lot of archives that have started using ProRes as their target preservation format, but that's really not recommended because, again, that is owned by Apple. And if Apple decides to no longer support it, suddenly you're going to have a lot of ProRes files, even though it's great and editors love to use it, but you're going to have to migrate those ProRes files to another file format in the future. So it's recommended that you try to find an open format that you can support internally. By the way, ProRes is fine for and that's a neat format. I just don't recommend it as a preservation file format. Okay, so just some ideas, just some image out there. So as you're thinking about your standard depth original source material, so let's say your source is on the higher end of the content or potential quality spectrums. You have your open reel formats, your 2-inch, your 1-inch, your half-inch open reel. You have your beta cam, your beta SP 3/4 inch, and Matic if it's good quality. So you might want to go to uncompressed 10-bit or JPEG 2000. If some archives are going to JPEG 2000, I don't find the support is really out there for hardware yet, so it's not what I would recommend. Uncompressed 10-bit, but then you look at this file size there. You have to think about right? So 1 hour video could be 63 gigs, and so then you have to do some math. If you know the spreadsheet, figure out what's useful in storage. Some folks will use DV50 if they realize, gosh, we just can't support these really large files, so we just transfer to DV50. And even though it's really like DVC Pro 50, which one would think is a proprietary format, so it's not an open standard, it has such wide support out there. Every single platform can support DV50, and so some folks are saying, like, well, I'm just going to go there. That's our middle ground. That's all we can really support. You know, the philosophy a lot of people now is because they realize this crisis of the magnetic media, and they think, you know what, rather than sit around and quibble if we really support uncompressed 10-bit or not, let's just do it to DV50 so at least we have some content and get it off that tape and save it, because there isn't really time to argue about this for very long. We have to make a decision in mind. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if you have poor source content, material, then folks again will go to DV50 or go to DV25. And I know that several national broadcasters, they actually use, one that has DV25 and two others that use DV50. And that's what they're transferring their old legacy videotape to. Because they say, look, you know, this material was shot to be broadcast on a small screen. It was never intended to be like this beautiful 4K kind of image. So they'll just transfer it either in standard depth into these smaller formats because they also have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of content and they can't support doing everything at a high res. So they had to find a compromise in this scenario. Anyway, so as you can see, DV25, a lot of smaller organizations will actually use DV25, 13 gigs an hour. They feel like they can support that internally. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, if you have HD out there, so you can see immediately if you want to transfer to HD material, if you want to go to 10-bit and compressed route, it goes to 445 gigs. Now, these are just rough. Oops, I didn't open the JP2000. Sorry. But that's roughly for HD. That's about maybe like 50 to 100 gigs an hour. So I'm sorry, no, it's going to be around 100 gigs an hour because it has to be 50. So it's 445, and of course it depends on your bit rate and some other variables. So this is just very, very rough estimates just to work with, but it gives you an idea about the kind of storage that you might have to be dealing with for transferring. And again, I have a note in there that ProRes is not mentioned since it's proprietary. It's fine for messaging, but I would recommend it as a Tadic digital preservation file format. Filenaming conventions. So you're digitizing your stuff, and so this is starting to go a little bit into both digital preservation and metadata, because your file name is the most important bit of metadata that you create. And your convention is one of the most important policies that you create. Each file statement, I was talking about original preservation, messaging, and access, they should share a unique identifier to show their relationships between them. And that UID can be based on a work or a content ID. Don't make your file name have the UID based on the item. They don't have it based on like, okay, this is the barcode for this pneumatic, so we're going to just call our file name what that barcode is. Because it isn't the item. I mean, you're going to track it exactly, the source material in your metadata. But the file name itself should have more of a work content ID rather than an item ID. We don't have time to get into unique identifier configurations. The difference there is that the work is information that's applicable to no matter which item is created from that work. You could have a pneumatic, you have a data stream, you have a file of it, you have 10 different items that all have the same content on it. So what you want to do, so the main thing here is that it's the content that is the key thing. So that's why UIDs for files have to be based on the work ID, the content ID. Don't have illegal characters, don't have spaces, and whoops. And don't let your digital management system assign random file names for this one. In my opinion, this is a feature that might be kind of difficult to make the link between your metadata and your files. But don't have time to get into that right now. Okay, Mike, let's keep going. The digital preservation. Okay, just quickly. So what you want to do is have the ability to do it is you want to check and make sure that that file format is exactly what it is. You know what format it is and what version. You want to create checksums, and these are three different kinds of checksums and how to get it out there. But you create that checksum when the final output is done, when the final file is approved. And you want to check that checksum. The checksum is an algorithm to make sure that that file, when it's created, and let's say that you transfer it, you have to create it or you give it to somebody else to adjust into another system, that you want to know that that file made it without losing any bits along the way, so that it has not been corrupted. So every time you disseminate or transfer that file, and also according to a schedule, then you want to check the health of that file, and you do that through fixed fee checks or by checking the checksum. And the schedule usually can be anywhere from every 6 months. Some people do it every quarter. Some people do it every year. It really depends on your infrastructure and your capability. Are the files stored on tape? Well, that's perhaps a manual process. You have to go and get the tapes. It's not handled by the system or down the server. That's easier. So it really depends on your infrastructure, how the files are stored. And you know that they're in the cloud and most likely not being checked. This is part of your SLA, so that's one thing to be wary of. But it's critical once you have these digital files. Remember that videotape itself, that physical media, is going to be dead within 20 years at the very most. So all you have left is that digital files. You have to take care of it. It's going to become precious. That's your content. So you have to make sure that that health is going to live on for 100 years or whatever is your time frame. You want to have 2 to 3 copies that are geographically dispersed, and that doesn't mean like one's in your basement and one's in your office. Somebody's okay, sound familiar, right? So you want to have them, preferably if you have, a friendly organization or whatever your work environment is, or just store them offsite somewhere. If you have your stuff separated, just in case of catastrophe. And you also want to check your formats for obsolescence, because just as those video formats became obsolete, if you're using a proprietary video format from a lot of born digital content, we're not talking about born digital content here, but all these born digital video files that are coming out of cameras, those are all proprietary. That's a topic for a whole separate Meetup presentation, is how to deal with those formats, the born digital stuff. Because you want to make sure that you're doing this format, this program version, or whatever file you're using is no longer being supported, then you need to migrate the file itself, not just the media. You need to migrate the file to the next format, or the approved format. Okay, and you need to revalidate and migrate to the media within a 5-year cycle. 5 years is usually used because that's roughly the time for 2 generations of LTO. And also, it's usually if you have your on servers, then usually the hardware has basically you swap out every 5 years anyway. So every time you are going to be swapping out to a new technology or hardware or media format generation, then you want to go ahead and revalidate and migrate at that time anyway. Okay, next slide. So starting to go into metadata. So all of this stuff that you're transferring from analog original to a digital format, you're going to be tracking all of those actions through your metadata, because you're not going to be in your job forever. And so that metadata is what's going to live on and track and tell people who come on after you that this is what work was done. Especially, again, that videotape's going to be dead, your digital file will live on. So you need to know exactly what was the source that was used for this digital file, what was the hardware and the software that was used. That's considered to be like process metadata. It's associated with preservation metadata. And what some people would think of supply as tracking what cable, what exact cable was used if you do it internally, what monitor was used to check SUC. Because if you find an issue with the file later on, you want to go back and try to find out, okay, what caused the problem? And then you want to find all the other files that were created using that exact same setup. So you can check those files and make sure they're okay. And the third bullet point is in your metadata, you want to track the characteristics of the file. That's your technical metadata. It's a technical metadata. What's the file size? What's the format? The bit rate, aspect ratio, all of that. You want to track all of that. Unfortunately, that kind of metadata you can easily extract from the file itself and dump it even into the CSV and Excel file to then put into your DAM system. Okay, next slide. All right, so metadata, we are simulating into metadata. Now, I gave Mike a PDF which will distribute to all of you, which lists some metadata standards in more detail, and there are links to the research on those so you can look and see what they're all about. So I won't be going into metadata standards in detail for those in time. But the broad metadata types are there's descriptive, and that means what is it about? Who created the content? These are going to be your controlled vocabularies, your taxonomies. This is the descriptive metadata is metadata that is applicable to any copy or item of the work. So again, you can have 10 copies in a variety of formats, 10 items, but it's still the same director, it's still the same attendant person, it's still the same cast, all of that. The subject matter is all the same. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. Now, the technical, though, is more item specific. And so that's information about the actual item, the file characteristics. And if you have physical media still, then we're going to describe the physical media as well. Preservation information is where we're going to be tracking information on how the item was created and what is the rendering environment. We have this digital file. What's the software that's required in order to render the file, to play the file? And rights information, of course, intellectual property rights information. What rights do you have to the file, what underlying rights are there, et cetera, et cetera. Anything about that. Okay, next slide. So the kinds of standards that are out there. So there's data structure, that's the top one. That's basically where you put your metadata. Commonly a list of fields, data elements, that could be a data dictionary, some of you may put that here. That's basically when you're all sitting around saying, well, what fields do we need? That's your data structure. Data schema is related to that. It gets a bit more complicated when you're actually developing out your data schema for your DAMs, for example. So, for example, it shows relationships between fields and elements. You might have a title, and then you have a Next slide. Data rules is the third kind of standard, and those are rules for how the data images should be constructed. They're sometimes called content standards in the library community, and that basically is like when you're typing out somebody's name or adding somebody's entry to somebody's name. You do the last name first, and then the first, or is it first last? That kind of thing. How should you structure out when you describe subject, that kind of information and rules. Data values then are going to be, those are the actual control vocabularies if you want to specify what values go into specific fields for your keywords, for your subjects, for your information. Let's keep going. Okay, so as you're developing out your data structure, you're looking for the standards, but you're most likely going to using that 16 standards if you want to look at them for guidance. You should really be as granular as possible because you're going to be migrating your data from one system to another and to one where it's inevitable it's going to happen over the metadata's life. So it's a lot easier to migrate if you have discrete fields rather than smooshing everything together into one field. So I'll give you an example in the next slide. That and here. Okay. So on the left, we have the words data field. Described as the purpose of the report, that's the item ID for the two. One user data is 23 minutes. On the right are more granular data fields, and why you want to do this is like, so the tape ID is a separate field, and look, there are leading zeros, because you assume that you will have no more than 99,990.
Hello. Hey, you back?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
You hear me, Linda?
I don't see the slide deck yet.
Okay. Let me. You know what? I need to. I think I might need to share it again. Actually, come to think of it. What is it saying? Now it's saying I'm offline. There we go. Okay. Sorry, folks. Let me know when you can see it.
Anyway, so if you use granular kind of structure, then you can remove the reports and say, I'm going to use vocabulary, so it's busy data, not visible data, not visible space data, on top of that. And then you can calculate all the total running times. So then you can say, okay, I can calculate your running times. I have 8 hours and 15 minutes and 20 seconds in total content, and I want to transfer it to file format text. And you do the math, and you figure out, oops, it's going to be a petabyte of storage. And then you say, nope, can't do that. And so then you start looking at a different file format, that would be more manageable. So that's why you want to have it more granular. You couldn't do that with the data and the structure on the left side. Okay, next slide. But it is expensive to produce, that's the problem here. And so sometimes what folks will do is that they'll apply a simple data structure and they automate the capture as much as possible. So you extract the technical metadata, you just try to use hot folders if you're in an environment where you can do that, where metadata can be attached to a hot folder and then ingested into the bin. You try to do a workaround so that you can have that kind of metadata added without too much human effort. Okay, next slide. And the next slide is just a list of a bunch of standards, which again don't have that PDF, so I just wanted to run through. Basically to say that the data structure standards can come from 4 different communities. So these are from like the straight ahead library. You know that some of you probably have library science degrees, so these undoubtedly look very familiar to you. Let's go to the next slide. But if you're working in a corporate environment, not inappropriate, it really, your standard depends, that you look at the guidance, depends on your environment. From the traditional film and television platform community, we have these 2 standards. We have this treated program, like some of the fields are very limited. The second one is new, and this really is really only applicable to film archives. So if you have film collections and more theatrical productions, this is more appropriate for that. But it's worth looking at because you might get some nice ideas for a data schema about how to use all those qualifier type fields, like the type fields. Next slide. The broadcasting fees, there are more that might be relevant to you. So we have TV core based on the US people broadcasting, TV core from the European broadcasting. IPTC has some very minimal data structures, but to most people will look to that in broadcasting. They will look to it for more the control vocabularies that they have. SEMTI has a couple of standards. EMS1 is more, it's a core metadata set for digital cinema. SEMTI core is a new group, and they're sort of involved on that committee developing that standard for a core stack of descriptive metadata. Media Lab is where you have where people can look whether they can use either at all. But that registry number has underlying metadata associated to it. So people will look at the core metadata as guidance as they develop their internal structures. Next slide. For technical metadata, there's the SEMTI Metadata Dictionary, RP Dictionary. It's 2000. It's great, they're wonderful. We don't need to use that before. It's great. It's not just technical metadata, but there's descriptive and rights metadata as well. If you have time and you're doing looking at spreadsheets that PDF that Dave to you has a link to where you can find the standard. And PV Core and EV Core have extensive technical metadata. Preservation metadata, there's really one standard out there, and that's the premise standard from Library of Congress. And again, there are links and further descriptions of these standards, plus a few others, in that PDF that Mike should send out to all of you. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so it's almost 9 o'clock this time. So that's it. Any questions?
Okay, if anybody wants to come off mute, let's give this a shot and see if it works. Any questions? I'll get it started. Without exposing too much about the situation, you know, that you may be working in certain parts of your job, consulting, etc. What would you say the state of compliance is to these best practices in, say, major movie studios? Is it or in television, broadcast, wherever? Is there still, do people follow the best practices, or is it sort of gone in the direction as most video domains now, where it's pretty much just all fast and loose and people don't really pay attention to standards?
Well, it depends. So if you're talking about the video transfers versus the metadata, I mean, those are 2 totally different topics. And then the preservation actions. Boy, I would say the area that's most neglected are the digital preservation actions that people know that they should do, but they just don't have the staff to do it, or the infrastructure to do it, or they don't know how to do it. They don't know the steps to take. And so that, unfortunately, they feel like, okay, if we have the second copy that is backed up at Iron Mountain or somewhere else, then that's fine. But they're not doing anything else. Sometimes they'll do a checksum, but usually they don't even do that. So all they're doing is practicing redundancy with 2 copies. And unfortunately, that's it with digital preservation. That's going to be a crisis point. Right. We're all waiting to see what's going to happen when they have to migrate to new media. As far as going for transferring their analog source materials to digital files, the broadcaster was mentioning that they have so much content out there, and they can't store it all if it's at like these high best practices of uncompressed video. There's just no way. So again, they're doing it at either DV25 or DV50 in the U.S. And actually, I believe the BBC, which has been open about their standards, they're doing it at DV50 in England. Because again, they just have so much stuff to transfer. As as far as metadata goes, in Europe it's different. There seems to be a consensus where they're all going to be transferring their analog video to JPEG 2000.
Mm-hmm.
They've all kind of come behind that.
Okay.
Yeah, film studios are something different because they're dealing mainly with film material, and those are different standards that they're looking to for that. The metadata, though, is what people are really looking for because they have, as you guys probably all know, in their own environments where there are all these siloed databases, different departments working together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of what I do is where I go in there and I do an audit and say, okay, who's doing what, and we'll bring it together in one big enterprise metadata map that they can then put into an enterprise system, their system. Mm-hmm. And they all want the magic bullet. They all say, isn't there one standard that will work? And I tell them, no, there isn't. And it's pretty much a given that you're going to look to one standard for guidance for descriptive metadata, and it's not going to do everything you want, so you might then be bringing in some ideas from another metadata standard. That's very helpful. Technical metadata, they all get scared about, and they don't always understand why they have to have granular field of technical metadata, and why can't they just smoosh all the technical metadata into one big block field. Mm-hmm. Because they're not thinking about future-proofing of their content, their assets. They're not thinking that they're going to have to migrate into the future, even the file formats themselves, not just the media.
And when you're talking about different siloed groups, I mean, there must be a lot of remediation and a lot of cleanup of pre-existing metadata, which is always the hardest thing to do, really, to go back.
Yeah, exactly. And so the ideal thing to do is that they clean it up in an existing system before before it's all mapped and merged into this one system. It's better to do it in the environment in which they're familiar. Do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from anybody out there? I'll ask one more. I don't know if I have everybody muted. That's my concern here. Can you? No. So the other question, I guess, is because we have a wide range of people who will be watching this. People who are either in the industry or starting in the industry, or are in library school, interested in archives. And do you see the sort of work that you're doing as something that is a growth area within archives?
Metadata?
Metadata and just video preservation and preservation of moving images.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's more and more interest in the needs of this, absolutely, because archives are starting to, where the folks who have like the video, magnetic media, when it's thinking about the video, since the focus of this presentation, they're understanding that this media is going to die. And so all of a sudden it's saying, well, here, we have to transfer it. But then it's not just saying like, okay, we need to digitize it all, but then we have to then manage those files. And that's where information science becomes very critical, to understand the preservation aspects of those digital files, how you need to preserve them going forward, and then all of the metadata around them associated with them. So it's no longer when you're just tracking the descriptive metadata, but you really need to know everything about how these files were created so that when, say, your TV station has its 100-year anniversary, or several have already had their 50-year anniversary, you want that content to be around, so that it can be used in 100 years.
Mm-hmm. And certainly there's a monetary value, too, in terms of being able to get some sort of maybe residual long tail out of older videos if it's still around. So there's also probably a monetary aspect for that too. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I actually don't know. I mean, hey, these people, it's a business. I don't know any broadcaster who's preserving their stuff just for humanity.
Yeah.
I just might feel that way. But the company, they want to sell their stuff. So absolutely, that's why they're digitizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always, I've seen it in every single organization I've gone to where the archivists care dearly about the content. They don't want to see it die, but they have to then make the pitch to their the administration, the people above them, about why they need to spend the money to do that. So all they can do is try to say, well, it's important because this is an important piece of work, and you might be able to sell it when you get on the road.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think we're at the top of the hour, and I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and this is really amazing, fascinating talk you gave. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I think we still have a few people left. I can't even really tell at this point, but I thank Linda for doing this and dealing with whatever sort of technical issues we might have had, which actually weren't so bad, hopefully. And just like to thank you and wish everybody a good night.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all. It was fun.
Okay, we will be posting this up on. We'll be posting this online once I take a look at it and make sure that it's good to go. And this will, once this is preserved in a way that works, I'll also be posting up Linda's deck as well as the PDF to the Meetup group, and you can take a look at it and use it as a great piece of source material. Okay, so thanks everybody.
Great.
Bye-bye.